Welcome back again to Back Garden Bushcraft. So this time I'm going to take you through a few of the bushcraft tools that we use, the reasons why you would use them, and how to handle them safely. So the first tool we might use is the folding knife, the pocket knife. This is a small folding knife you can carry on you fairly easily, and just safely open it. On them they have a thumb notch, which is where you would place your fingernail, and you're going to open it carefully, keeping your fingers away from the blade until it locks safely in place. The blade is now open. To close this knife now, you want to keep your fingers well away from that slot there, because that's where the blade goes back into. So you pinch it either side. You place flat of your hand against the back of the blade, and then keeping your fingers well out of the way, it folds round. Be careful, because when it gets to this point, the spring will close it. You do not want your fingers between the blade and the handle. Your pocket knife is used for small whittling, carving tasks, cutting cord, maybe little tasks around camp. This is a small tool. You have to be careful because the blade does not lock open, so therefore if you are trying to push it into something or using a lot of pressure, the blade can snap shut on your fingers. To move up to some heavier work, we would not use the pocket knife. We'll put the knife safely away, and then we move on to a heavier duty knife. So we'll have here a Mora companion knife. This is something that many of you within Scouts will use. Again, to use this knife, you have to be careful. There's a sharp blade. It grips into the sheath. There's a little thumb piece there to push on to take the knife out. So fingers away from the cutting edge. You do not want any fingers up here when you're trying to draw the knife. Grip firmly, thumb on there, and you just use that to release it. You can remove the knife out, and you change it into a fist grip. This is the starting position you'd use for any cut, and then you would transfer it round in your hand to get the position you want for any further cuts. So I'm just going to safely put this back into the sheath for a moment before we move on to the next bit. So again, going back in, make sure all fingers are out of the way. It goes in there until it clicks. So ideally, when you're doing any sort of bushcraft, you want to be using your own knife at all times. However, there are some circumstances when you may need to pass a knife to someone else. The ideal way to pass a knife is with the knife still in its sheath, and with my assistant Zach, I'm going to demonstrate how to pass a knife safely. So we will turn to face each other so we can both see what we're doing. I am going to take the knife and hold the sheath, making sure that it is securely in there. I'm then going to pass it to Zach, who will take it firmly in his hand and release it to him. We're looking at each other so that we make sure that both of us have got a firm grip on the knife. And the same to pass it back. Thank you. There are circumstances when it's not possible to pass the knife in its sheath, and that's because the sheath will be attached to your belt. So in that case, we'll remove the knife, and you'll have the knife in your fist grip. To pass the knife, you do not want the blade to be anywhere near your hand. So I'm going to turn and rotate it so that the handle is passed forward. The back edge of the blade is against my hand or close to my hand, so that even if the knife is pulled without me realizing it's going to happen, there's no sharp edge to cut the back of my hand. I'm going to pass it over. Now Zach has the knife, he's going to then pass it back to me. Thank you, Zach. And then we'll put the knife safely away before we do anything else. So, the Mora knife that we have is a fixed bladed knife. It's a very good basic bushcraft knife. However, it is not a full tang knife. A full tang knife, the blade travels all the way through the handle and comes out often at the other end. This knife is about 3/4 tang, so there's a metal, the metal of the blade runs down to about that part of the handle. These are very well secured and will take a lot of abuse, including even some light battening, which is using a knife to split some sticks. However, if you want to go on to some slightly more heavy duty tasks, we can move up to a full tang knife, which is one I have here. This is my knife that I use for all my camping bushcraft. Not only is there the knife, we also have a ferro rod for creating the sparks of fire attached, and on there I have a small field sharpening stone just to keep the edge on the knife at all times. The safest knife you can ever use is a sharp knife. So, to remove this knife from the sheath, slightly differently, this has a leather strap that keeps it tight. So you release the press stud and draw the knife. Again, this is fairly heavier blade, but where you can see here, this is a full tang knife. The blade travels all the way back, goes all the way through the handle, and is secured by rivets, and then there's a lanyard tube. The other thing about this knife is it has a Scandinavian grind, which is the sharp beveled edge on it. This is what creates the sharp cutting blade. The Scandi grind is used for a lot of bushcraft knives, mainly because it's a nice easy blade to sharpen and to maintain a sharp edge. And your priority should always be to keep the sharpest possible edge on your knife. The sharper the edge, the less force you have to use to cut anything, and the less chance of the blade slipping when you don't want it to, and avoiding any injuries. So we're going to put the knife back into the sheath. And then we secure it by the strap. That makes sure the knife cannot pull out or drop out when you're not using it. So, knives are your main tool that you will use at camp. However, there are tasks which you cannot do with a knife. Even a full tang knife has its limitations to when it comes to splitting pieces of wood. The piece of wood that I would choose to split with that knife would probably only be a maximum of 4 to 5 centimeters across, because you don't have enough of the blade coming out the other side to strike safely, and also it puts far too much pressure onto the knife blade. So, to split efficiently bigger pieces of wood, we would move up to an axe. This is a small camp hatchet. It's got a slightly longer handle than you would normally find on most hand axes. This just allows me to get a little bit more leverage when I want to swing it to split a log. Also, you can use it with 2 hands, just to apply a little bit more force. Blade, like all blades, is covered with a mask, which we remove before use. Again, we want to keep that cutting edge nice and sharp, though possibly does not need to be as sharp as a knife. The end of the axe is secured with a wooden wedge that runs through a cut in the middle, and then there is a steel staple which holds it all together. The first thing before you use an axe is to check to make sure that there's no wobble on the head. If the head is loose or there are any splits in the handle, you do not use that. You put it to one side until it can be safely repaired. Again, to cover the blade, we put the mask back on it and secure it. Now, many of you will think you can use axes for cutting down trees, small bits of wood processing. Axes are not necessarily the most efficient way of breaking down long pieces of timber into usable lengths. And certainly for the scouts, it's probably far safer if they do not use an axe for that and only use the axe for splitting logs down into more manageable pieces of firewood. That's today's back garden bushcraft completed, and hopefully we'll have another video for you very soon.